Welcome to the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding Civil Rights Leaders Forum. The subject is the role that the Jewish community can play today in combating racial injustice and racial inequality. During the civil rights struggles of the 1960s and the late 50s, there was no segment of American society that provided as much and as consistent support to Dr. King and to the African American community as did the Jewish community. And today, the Jewish community stands in solidarity with our nation's civil rights leaders and with the African American community in combating the systemic racism, racial bias, racial hatred, racial inequality, and racial injustice. And we are so honored to have with us a friend of many, many years, the distinguished president and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. Charles Steele. The SCLC was founded by the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I know that it is in the best of hands under the distinguished and most capable leadership of Dr. Steele. So Dr. Steele, or as I affectionately refer to as Charles, Charles, my friend, let's begin with my first question. That as the head of this most august civil rights organization, why do you think it took the senseless and brutal killing and murder of George Floyd to mobilize and galvanize the African American community and men and women from all walks of life across America? After all, there have been countless others who have been brutalized by such racial injustice and racial bias. What was it about this particular killing of George Floyd that has brought about this tremendous response that we are now seeing in the United States and around the world?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Rabbi. You one of the best that I know in terms of relationship building and the long-lasting affiliation with SCLC under my leadership. And we don't take that lightly. You have been very impactful to us in my maintaining my leadership with Dr. King's as co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I want to say that. Secondly, many people don't realize that, excuse me, during the movement and Dr. King particular leadership, it was back in the 50s and the 60s, but again, it was technology. Had not the news media at that time coalesce and saw the significance and the impactfulness of what Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, along with Rosa Parks, we can't forget about that, as well as Emmett Till, in terms of 1955, with Mamie Till Mobley, who was a very good friend of mine, opening up that casket when Emmett Till was murdered and tortured. That led to Rosa Parks a few months later. That was August when Miss Mamie Till Mobley did it. And then in December the 2nd, Rosa Parks had to encourage, because of Mamie Till and ultimately Mamie Till Mobley, in terms of opening up that casket, inspired Rosa Parks, Miss Rosa Parks. And it was the technology of television that conveyed and got the word out. It's one thing to hear a sermon, but it's another thing to see one. And it was conveyed throughout the world in terms of the brutality that took place with Emmett Till, and ultimately when Dr. King took on the Montgomery bus boycott movement. So I'm saying what happened with George Floyd was technology. The iPhone, in terms of people being aware and being trained today in how to use the camera on the iPhone. The other situation, even with Ahmaud Arbery, I've been working with his mother in the last 3 weeks. With Ahmaud Arbery, look at the lateness and the delayed involvement of that situation, because at that particular time, there was no video. And then with this young man with his role in videoing what took place, I think his last name was Bryant, when Mr. Bryant did the video, and ultimately God touched his heart to share it, because for whatever reason, had it not been that video of Mr. Bryant, it would not have been visualized and impactfulness of a movement in Ahmaud Arbery as it is today. And it was all about technology. The same with Dr. King. People visually experienced and saw what took place. I refer back to Ahmaud Arbery. It was not emotionally felt until that video came out.
It's a very profound observation about technology. Thank you for sharing that with us. Charles, you've had a long-standing relationship with the Jewish community, not only in the United States, but in the state of Israel as well. You were a dear personal friend of the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. You actually maintain an office in Israel, in Dimona. So my question to you is, in addressing the Jewish community, in what way today can we be of help? Can we be of assistance to the African American community? How can the Jewish community today lead the way in combating racial injustice and racial inequality?
Well, when I was invited to Jerusalem, at the moment in time, I didn't realize the impactfulness that Prime Minister Ariel Sharon would have on me. When he invited me there, and I spent about 10 days in establishing an office in Dimona, Israel, simultaneously, he mentioned to me that it was a reason that he invited me was because Dr. King in 1967 had visited Israel and had committed to bringing some African Americans back so we could come together and coalesce in terms of the civil rights movement. But as you know, he was assassinated. Dr. King was assassinated April the 4th, 1968, and he never got back to keep his commitment to Israel at that particular time. So it was a impulse type of vision that Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and his staff had to invite me so we could reestablish that reunion and that commitment that Dr. King had made. Now, moving forward in terms of how do we reconnect, or how do we have the same policy of embarking upon the upper mobility of bringing the world together? Because that's what the minister told me at that time, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, was that we can't do it without us working together, the African American community and the Jewish community. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon didn't know it at the time, but he struck a nerve with me. And I've been back to Israel many times since then, and establishing an office in Dimona. After saying all of that, I want to go to the Kenyan philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because ultimately that's what we ended up doing after several of my returns to Israel. I took my chairman of the board, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who was a world-renowned trainer in the Kenyan philosophy. 6 principles, I'm gonna give you the first 2. Gather information. We must gather information in terms of the historicity of the Jewish community in Israel in relationship to the history of the African American colored folks, Negroes, and the transatlantic African slave trade. We must understand and get the facts on both our history. Number 2, in the Kenyan philosophy, Dr. King said, after you get the facts, you educate the people. You educate the people. Number 3, a personal commitment. You have to make a personal commitment to do this. Number 4, you have to negotiate in terms of whatever it is that you're trying to do. Number 5, direct action. Number 6, always reconcile. Let me close with this. That's what you're seeing today is direct action in terms of people around the world, bringing about their observation in terms of something must change because of the technology that virtually expound itself all over the world. People doing Zooming, people doing iPhone, and they're recording iPods on their stories. They are telling stories about where we have come from, but they're also concerned about where we must go in the future. So to work with the Jewish community, the historicity comes first, the factual information of who we are on both sides.
Charles, in my book that I authored with Martin Luther King III, Shared Dreams, I referenced what you said about Dr. King's longing to visit Israel. He had come in through Jordan before 67, before the Six-Day War, when the state of Israel did not have the old city of Jerusalem. And as you mentioned, he had made that commitment and that promise to return actually to the state of Israel. Unfortunately, he was not able to fulfill that promise because of his assassination and his tragic passing. I also want to remind you and all our listeners that Israel is unique in the Jewish world. That's the only country in the history of the world to have ever taken blacks out of Africa en masse for freedom. Not the United States, not England, not France, little Israel, where today we have over as you know, we have over 130,000 Ethiopian Jews in the state of Israel. And that's because of the leadership that Israel has demonstrated in terms of rescuing the Jewish community of Ethiopia and rescuing all these Africans and bringing them to the state of Israel, as you're aware of. My next question is about the COVID-19. That's taken a disproportionate toll on Black and brown communities. And you yourself issued a call to the federal government that all Americans should benefit from the nearly $1 trillion that has been spent to restore the health of citizens and the economy. Could you elaborate and just comment for us on what steps are needed today to protect the health of Black and brown communities, and if that requires economic incentives as well, not only on the part of the government, but on the part of different faith communities?
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, I have to go back to history again. People don't like to talk about racism, Rabbi Schneier, and I can't talk in excerpts without telling the truth and the facts. America was founded upon white supremacy during the transatlantic African slave trade. And one of the worst bondagement of a people to any degree has been the African American from the African transatlantic African slave trade. That racism that's been embedded in mindset in America for many of years, 401 years now, related to the African American community. We had never gotten any reparation. Let's just call it like it is. You know, I talk straight. People don't like to talk straight on certain issues. I'm in position to have an obligation and a commitment because of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, that my Christianity embedded in me must be exposed and communicated to. That's why we're having the problems of today with the brutality of the police force. Let me just say this. Dr. King, as you know, Rabbi Schneier, that he talked about 3 ills in society that people don't like to talk about. And if you don't talk about it, it's a cancer. It continues to grow. Racism is a virus. It's a silent killer. It doesn't have to be from COVID-19, but it is. We've been dying from various coronaviruses since we've been to America. So my whole point, Dr. King said, the 3 ills in society, and I'm gonna bring it home to you. Racism, poverty, and militaristic. The military. You saw what happened with the current president a couple weeks ago. What did he do to get that photo out? He brought out the military, you know, to brutally push and shove the people in tear gas and all that, just to get a photo out. Disrespect in the terms of the human race of all ethnicity and background. This has to be eradicated from our society. So dealing with COVID-19, you know, the Indians was primarily almost wiped out with smallpox. And now, you know, you have affecting African Americans, the coronavirus, COVID-19, wiping us out. Why? Because of racism. We have no access to capital. We have no access to health care. We have no access to the respectability of a human being. Many people don't know, Rabbi, that we have gone back to Jim Crowism in this country. 2013, Section 4 and Section 5 was gutted from the 1965 Voter Rights Act. What does that mean, Charles? What does that have to do with anything? We have gone back to state rights. You saw what happened in my state now of Georgia. I'm traditionally connected with Georgia and Alabama because Alabama is my birth home. And while I was a state senator, I was the first state senator from Alabama in Tuscaloosa, the city of Tuscaloosa, since Reconstruction. I was also one of the first city councilmen. So now I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I resigned my state senate seat to come to Atlanta, Georgia to save SCLC. God directed me to come here. So what I'm saying is that it's because of white supremacy and racism, which is a coronavirus in its own right. It's a silent killer. It has eliminated us to be on a level playing field. We've never gotten the reparation nor respect that this country owes us.
Well, you're spot on when it comes to the COVID-19, comes to the coronavirus, makes no distinction when it comes to ethnicity, when it comes to gender, when it comes to religion. There is unfortunately total democracy in our suffering. No one is exempt and no one is immune.
But it's affects African Americans more, Rabbi, than it does others.
No question, and I thank you for explaining to us and for enlightening us as to why it is having such a disproportionate effect on the African American community and on Black and Brown communities in general. My last question, anti-Semitism is on the rise in 2020. And some of the most recent protests and demonstrations across the country took an ugly turn, with synagogues and Jewish shops in LA being targeted and defaced. What words of solidarity, my friend, can you offer the Jewish community in light of these unfortunate incidents?
I would like to convey to the Jewish community that we, as African proverbs, we can turn a crisis into an opportunity. There's always an opportunity behind a crisis. Let's take COVID without being redundant. Let's take COVID-19. As big as a crisis as it is an opportunity. Number one is the fact of COVID-19 and with the various racist policies of the world, not just America, but the world basically follow the policies and the implementations of the human race in terms of coalescing. They always look toward America for the leadership. So what I'm saying in terms of the Jewish community, in all communities, but particularly the African American community, we must come together and find a happy medium. It's up to us. And one way we can do it is to understand the 6 principles in the kingdom philosophy. I think every institution in the world should be trained on the kingdom philosophy. Gathering the facts, I went through those 6 steps, but number one, gathering the facts. People can't argue with you in terms of the facts. You have the facts, I have the facts. The Jewish community has its own historicity and facts of where you come from. We have the historicity in our community. Let's start with us, the Jewish community, African American community, coming together. Why? We can set an example. And I'm saying that would lead the way for freedom for all of God's children.
I've been so honored partnering with you, working with you, and restoring that historic Black Jewish alliance. And when it comes to the Jewish community solidarity, Charles, with the African American community, we understand that a people who fight for their own rights are only as honorable as when they fight for the rights of all people.
That's right.
We demonstrated that with the African American community during the civil rights struggle. We will continue, and we do continue to demonstrate that today. I loved your observation about transforming a crisis into an opportunity, or as I would say, my friend, it's transforming people who are victims of circumstance into victors of circumstance.
I like that so much.
I
like that.
You're more than welcome to use it in
I'm going to give you credit the first time.
Thank you. Listen, I've been so blessed to have you part of my life, and you've been so kind, and you're always giving me credit. But I want to conclude by expressing my heartfelt thanks for this conversation. You're truly a blessing, not only in my life, but to the life of our nation, the life of our society, and God should continue to bless you and watch over you in your stewardship of a iconic civil rights organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, as you continue to walk in the footsteps of its founder, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Charles Steele, thank you so much for this conversation, and may we continue to work and partner together in good health for years to come.
Thank you, my friend, and Godspeed. Looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you.